Hi, we are broadcasting now. I see that folks are starting to join the webinar. We're thrilled to have a great audience today. My name is Isabel Harrison, and I will begin with some logistical details and introductions in just a minute. Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar discussion of Decarbonizing the Residential Sector, the Digital Roadmap to an Electric House, hosted by the Renewable Thermal Alliance. I am Isabel Harrison, a Master of Environmental Management candidate at Yale School of the Environment. Outside of my courses, I support the team at the Renewable Thermal Alliance, and I'm thrilled to be facilitating today's events. Thanks to our participants being here today. We have a great audience tuning in already. Before I dive into the overview of the Renewable Thermal Alliance and officially welcome our guest speaker, I want to make a few quick logistical notes. First, I want to invite you to share any questions throughout the webinar through the Q&A panel on your screen. Also, I want to note that you can upvote questions from other attendees if you're interested in hearing the answers to the question too. And we will have a dedicated time for questions at the end of the webinar. I also want to note that this webinar will be recorded and available on the Yale Center for the Business and Environment website in the coming days. You can find the link right here on the title slide for the webinar for the Renewable Thermal Alliance. So as I get started, I want to invite you all to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves and say where you're coming from today. However, if you could just only use the chat feature for introductions and pose any questions through the Q&A feature, just so we can keep track of the questions in one place. Great, thank you. So diving right in, today there are 74 million single-family homes in the United States. Many are dependent on fossil fuels. The equipment in American homes includes 69 million fossil fuel space heaters, 63 million gas water heaters, 40 million gas ranges, and 19 million gas dryers, and they're all responsible for 20% of carbon emissions. And today we're here to learn about decarbonizing the residential sector, specifically by helping homeowners reduce emissions and save money with investments in efficiency and electrification. So as background on the RTA overall, the Renewable Thermal Alliance, of course, renewable heating and cooling are increasingly seen as opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time increase energy affordability, reliability, and resilience. Heating and cooling nationwide account for respectively about 65% and 24% of energy delivered to residential and commercial customers, but the sector remains dominated by fossil fuels, as I highlighted earlier. And the Renewable Thermal Alliance is a public-private partnership initiated by NYSERDA, the Connecticut Greenbanc, and Yale University, which aims to develop the infrastructure for large-scale deployment of renewable thermal technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through energy savings and fuel shifting. And this webinar series that we're doing today is highlighting recipients of the 2020 Renewable Thermal Alliance Seed Innovation Grants, which are focused on policy, technology, and market developments in renewable heating and cooling. Today's webinar is actually the second in that series for this year, and I encourage you to visit the website at the link here to check out previous webinars, and you can also sign up to receive future updates about Renewable Thermal Alliance events. That's everything on logistical details and background on the Renewable Thermal Alliance, which is of course supported by the Yale Center for Business and Environment that I'm here with today. And I now want to officially welcome North Lennox from Greenbanc LLC. I will share an abbreviated version of his bio and then turn things over to him to tell us a bit about the product he developed with help from the grant. And of course, like I said, at the top of the hour, we will definitely leave adequate time in for Q&A. And again, of course, feel free to start introducing yourselves in the chat with a note about where you're coming from. Just it's exciting to know who all is here. Great. So in 2015, North started Greenbanc LLC to catalyze investments in residential energy efficiency and electrification by providing asset-based energy labels. They won the Inspire Space contest by Green Mountain Power and actually became the leading provider of home energy scores in Vermont. And in 2017, he moved out to Berkeley, California, and became the leading provider of home energy scores in the state of California. I'll let North tell you a lot more about all of that. I will note that he also has a bachelor's from Amherst College and an MBA from our own School of Management at Yale, and also an advanced diploma in clean energy from New York University. So with that being said, I am going to stop sharing my screen and pass things over to North to start sharing his slide deck. Let's take a moment here.
Thank you, Isabel. Let me cue that up. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be back in front of the Renewable Thermal Alliance, and I'm so appreciative of the grant and all of the help from you, Isabel, and Stuart and Claire, Nikki, and everyone there. It's really been quite the opportunity to be able to work on this concept and bring it to completion. In April of last year, I introduced the concept to this group, but since it's been a year, I think it'd be best just to do a little bit of introduction and before doing the demonstration of the application. So I'll jump right to that. So Electricasa is an app for homeowners that simplifies research by using uploaded photos to provide an asset-based analysis of building efficiency and electrification with a plan for improvements to increase comfort, efficiency, health, safety, and lower carbon footprint. When localized, it can enable communications regarding optimal replacement dates and changes in rebates and incentives. It can open up new marketing channels for contractors that will help achieve cost-effective electrification. So Electricasa is a tool that helps with research, communications, and marketing. The problem before us is really that there are 69, as Isabel had mentioned, there are 69 million fossil fuel space heaters and 63 million gas water heaters. And if we are going to convert those by 2050, we need to be on a pace of about 4 million homes per year. And the current pace is in the thousands. So it's much too low. And it's going to require some big and bold initiatives to get us from where we are today up to the 4 million homes. Typically, when we present this problem, the solution that's mentioned most frequently is rebates and incentives, and those really apply to the economics of change. But I would put to you that there are other challenges in this space to increasing electrification. One of them is that the ownership of those 130 million fossil fuel-based appliances are distributed among many owners, almost up to 70 million different owners. And those owners often don't even know what they have. And so it becomes very difficult to have a conversation about equipment where the owners don't really know about it. The other problem is that there's a lack of general awareness about efficient electric heat pumps. And so there's not a perception that they've made a choice about it. And oftentimes they haven't made a choice about it. If you can identify a homeowner and you know what kind of equipment they have, and you can convince them that a heat pump is a good alternative, then there's the question of when they should do the replacement. And often, if equipment is in good working order, there's no reason to replace it now. It's sort of like, if it's not fixed, if it's not broken, why do you have to fix it? And so burnout tails are a big problem. And then once equipment is ready to be burnt out, then it's a question of economics and how much it'll cost to do it. So there are solutions to each of those challenges. In the last decade, smartphones have become prevalent, and now everyone carries a smartphone. And that is really a revolutionary technology for being able to produce data around the equipment that people own. We use our phones to upload photos to send to family and friends. Why not use those tools for home energy performance? When you do get the data, you can provide grades and analysis, and you can start to draw a distinction between fossil fuel equipment and heat pumps. And you can start to make the choice more visible for people. And so they know that they are making a decision about it. And you can start to make plans so that even if equipment is in good working order, you can have a sense of when it needs to be replaced. And so the age of equipment is very important intelligence to tell to the people who own them and are planning to make their replacements. And then also with that data, you can start to affect the economics a bit by communications and marketing, which is something I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So the innovation of Electricasa is focused on research. And so what we're asking a homeowner to do is to upload 5 photos. The 5 photos are the front of the house, the roof, the attic insulation depth, the serial number of the water heater, and the serial number of the heating system. And with just those 5 photos, we can provide back analysis that is helpful and insightful. And we're really focused on 3 factors: the attic insulation depth versus what's recommended, the age and rating of the equipment, and the expected replacement date. And then we also can provide grades on building efficiency and electrification. And there's a footnote on grades for a minute. Building energy grades are absolutely necessary. And they're necessary because no one understands buildings, but everybody understands grades. Building science can be very complicated for someone who's not used to hearing terms like R value and COPs, and that complexity just, it doesn't make sense for most homeowners. And so grades are a way to cut through the confusion and really make it a more simple choice, which is what you need to really drive change in a mainstream way. When those grades are integrated into the real estate market, it starts to affect the behavior of home buyers. It affects the behavior of realtors, and it can even influence prices. And we've seen that happen in places like the European Union, where building energy grades have been around for a long time. The Obama administration knew about the importance of building energy grades, and they were responsible. The DOE under that administration put together a program called the Home Energy Score, and that was back in 2009. And the Home Energy Score is a good attempt to solve that problem, but it really, it's over 10 years old now. It was built for an earlier era, and it doesn't have good deployment tools. And so it makes it hard for cities and states to be able to use it. It's also expensive, and often realtors object to it, which I know from firsthand experience, and I can talk about in more depth. And so Electricasa is an alternative program. It's mobile first in its design. It's much cheaper and faster to deploy, and there's additional functionality that can be layered on top. The app, although it doesn't have it now, will soon, when it's deployed, it will enable communications and marketing in new ways. So a traditional energy report is delivered as a PDF, typically, as a single file. And everybody knows that single files are very easy to misplace or delete. And when you have data, a more modern approach is just to have data in the cloud. And that data in the cloud is always accessible. And it creates opportunities for notifications of things like changes in rebates and incentives. When new technologies come online, for example, 120-volt heat pump, you can be able to send messages to homeowners, and it can start to be an ongoing dialogue over time. There's also room for improvement in the marketing category because customer acquisition costs are significant, and contractors really don't like to spend a lot of time on sales. And so you can start to make much stronger connections between the homes that need improvement and the contractors that are ready to make those improvements. So I'm going to give credit to the team. Although I'm the only one speaking, there's a team of 4 people who have contributed a lot to this project. Elena did the UX design, and Sihi Sun did the back end and front end work over the course of last year. And Tom and Stephen joined the last couple of months, we've really worked on revising the application up to the point where we can show this demo. So I'm going to close out of the presentation now and start the demo. Okay, and so Electricasa is now live. It's at www.myelectricasa.com. This is the landing page, and we changed the name a bit. We're saying it's your home electrification advisor, which is a little more pointed to the homeowner. And we talk a little bit about how it works. And then it's really easy to create an account and sign in. And once you sign in, the first page that you see is called Electrify. And this really provides an overview of the most important factors in home energy performance: weatherization, the 4 uses of fossil fuels typically in a home: hot water, heating and cooling, cooking, and clothes drying. And then it also talks about the ability to add solar power and some other components that are really important: the size of the electrical panel and the ability to add an electric vehicle. And so this is kind of a public. We also talk about the grading system and the factors that we use to calculate grades. And then on MyCasa, you can upload the photos. Let's see. There we go. The photos are just loading. 1 second. But these are the 5 photos that we ask homeowners to upload. First is the front of the house, as I mentioned. This has the address. This house is in Berkeley, California. We ask people to take a picture of the roof because you can see whether PV has been installed in the roof. This is a picture of the attic insulation, and we're particularly concerned about the depth of insulation there. And then the water heater, this is the water heater serial number, and this is a tankless gas water heater built in 2018. And the heating and cooling system is a central gas furnace in 2004. And so once you've added these 5 photos, then you can go to the analysis page, and it shows the building efficiency rating and the components that go into calculating the building efficiency rating, which include the attic insulation, the wall insulation, floor insulation, the quality of the windows, and whether it was professionally air sealed or not. And the electrification rating, which is focused on all of the typically uses of fossil fuels in the house. So the water heater, the space heater, cooking, clothes drying, whether you have solar power. Underneath that, we have the analysis, which is very split into categories. The categories correspond to the grades. So really the grades are B, C, D, C, B, and A. And so the categories that we break equipment into follow the same methodology. And so if you have a high amount of insulation, that's sort of in the A area. If it's medium, it's B. If it's low, it's C. And if it's 0, which is really inefficient, then that's sort of a D grade. Similarly with the technology, we're focused on the water heater and the space heater. The best, we want to make it clear for people that the best thing you can have is a heat pump. And if you're using gas, you're kind of in a C level. If that equipment is old and needs to be replaced, then it would qualify as a D, something that needs to be fixed. We provide the electrification plan down below. That shows the measures of improvement and when you can expect to have to make those improvements. So for this particular house, the one recommendation of something that needs to be taken care of pretty quickly is the space heater, because this current space heater is 17 years old, so it's getting to the end of its life. On the top of the page, there's a section called projects, and this is a reiteration of what's in the electrification plan. But over time, we hope to partner with contractors to actually make these cards something that you can actually click on the cards and be able to make orders of attic insulation and heat pumps through Electricasa. And when we do have a partner agreement, we're going to be able to have much clearer guidance around what the pricing is. And so for the first time that I know of, we will hope to bring e-commerce to heat pumps, which is very exciting. Let's see if I can get this bar. So that's a single house. I'm going to move for a minute into the admin view. So this is a view that isn't available for a typical user, but it shows all of the houses that have been entered in the system. And another, just maybe we'll do one more house example. This is another house in Berkeley. This particular house, though, didn't score so well. It's got Ds for both. And the reason why it's got Ds for both is that there's zero attic insulation. And it has a particularly old water heater. The water heater is 20 years old, so the water heater needs to be replaced. And so this house has a different set of recommendations than the house that we saw previously. For this house, really, it should have its attic insulated, pretty quickly, and the water heater should be replaced. So the index view, I think that the index view has a lot of opportunities for policymakers. And I'll say that from experience. In 2018, there was a group called the East Bay Energy Watch who had funding available to pay for 10 heat pump water heaters. And it took them 4 months to find people to take 10 free heat pump water heaters, because most of the homeowners that they approached thought that they already had equipment in good working order. And so they didn't really feel an urgency to get a new water heater when theirs worked fine. And with a system like this, when you have many houses that are loaded into it, you can start to identify very quickly the houses, the equipment that needs to be replaced, and the owners of that equipment who would probably be receptive to an offer for a water heater. And so it gives you the ability to target messages and promotions for heat pumps in a way that really wasn't possible before. And if you would indulge me for a minute, if you imagine that there were 1 million, remember we have to get to 4 million houses that are electrified every year. So if there were just 1 million people on Electricasa, you could start to identify a lot of gas water heaters that needed to be replaced. And if there was a foundation that recognized that for every gas water heater you replace, you can remove about 11 tons of carbon emissions from making that swap, and they were to value those carbon emissions, reducing those carbon emissions at $40 a ton, or let's say $200 a ton, and they were able to offer an incentive of $2,200, then you could start to really see conversion of people replacing gas water heaters with heat pump water heaters. And if you had a lot of people, you could do tests of what the right incentive level would be to drive that conversion. And so, I don't really know what it would be, but it would be interesting to find out exactly what the rebate needed to be in order for them to be conversion at a level that we think is consistent with climate science. So that's the demo. I'm going to go back to the deck for a minute. So where Electricasa is really different than other solutions is we're oriented around homeowners and the homeowner experience. Back to reality for a minute. Most homeowners have sort of a grid of insufficient resources at their disposal when they're thinking about heat pumps. They can go to a utility website and they can get recommendations and rebate info, but it's not specific to their particular situation. They can go to a qualified contractor and get a detailed report, but it's going to cost them like $1,000 to do that. And it'll include their data and recommendations and quotes and rebate info. It's pretty solid. You can get a preliminary home asset analysis, like the home energy score, which will include your data, grades, recommendations, but it won't provide quotes, won't provide rebate info, and there's no follow-up. Or you can go directly to a contractor who will give you a quote. That's about it, typically just to replace the equipment that you have with more equipment of the same kind. And so Electricasa provides all of that information and does it really for free. And so we feel like there's a need for that from homeowners. If you look at the technology adoption curve for heat pumps, this is sort of all the houses out there. There are always innovators and early adopters who are willing to pay for a detailed audit and adopt heat pumps. That's probably 1/7 of the market. To really drive this into the mainstream, though, you need to have tools that are a little more accessible. And we really think Electricasa can apply to that early majority and late majority who want to adopt heat pumps, but maybe aren't quite ready to go all the way yet. And so, we can meet them where they are, which is using web and mobile technology, and we can kind of be more approachable at a lower price. So Electricasa is near ready to be deployed. The next steps for us are really to just continue to strengthen the user experience. And then we're interested in selecting a pilot territory. And then we think a partnership with a city would really be ideal. So I think that's it. I'll stop my share.
Great. Thank you so much, North, for sharing that background on Electricasa and walking us through the product. And thanks again to our audience for being here today and for already sharing some very thought-provoking questions. I also enjoyed reading your introductions in the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself there if you haven't had a chance to yet. Now, so far, we've learned a little bit about Project Electricasa, and we got to see a demo. And I will now jump into a facilitated discussion for about 20 minutes. You can also feel free to continue sharing your questions, and I will leave plenty of time at the end for those. So jumping right in, North, I understand that you conducted some testing of this app with actual homeowners already. And I believe telling stories about the real impacts of efficiency and electrification is always really compelling, can make a huge difference cost-wise, comfort-wise. Can you speak to some of your conversations with homeowners and maybe tell us some of the stories from the testing you did while, of course, maintaining everyone's privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was fun. It's always a fun app to test because it relies on much more engagement by the homeowner. When doing a traditional energy analysis, the homeowner doesn't even need to be home. I mean, you can be there and you can collect the data, and you just deliver a report afterwards, and they almost have they can have no involvement in that process. But when you're using an app and you're asking people to take photos of their house, they're much more involved, and there's a real sense of discovery when people go around, taking photos of things and learning more about how their house works. And you find that some people who have lived in homes for a long period of time have never been in their attic before, and they've probably taken 1,000 showers and they've never actually looked at their water heater. And so there's a real sense of discovery to learning about their house when they use this method. And for homeowners who do pursue improvements, especially when it comes to attic insulation and increases in comfort, it can often seem, it's like, why didn't we do this, years ago? It becomes obvious. People are often surprised at how low the cost is and how much benefit there is in making the improvements. With heat pumps, what's really great about, I almost feel like heat pumps have the wrong name. I mean, where heat pumps really shine is in cooling. So for people who have houses with heating systems, they don't always have cooling systems. And so when you install a heat pump, you don't just get heat, you get AC. And that's increasingly important to homeowners when the temperatures seem to get higher and higher every summer. Places like the Bay Area, no one ever had AC, and now people are realizing there's a real need for it. So If I was czar of this industry, I might rename heat pumps cool pumps, because that's really how they distinguish themselves from gas furnaces.
That's a great quotable from this webinar. Great. Well, on that note, I know you talked about education as a big part of Electricasa, and just looking at sort of some public opinion data. For example, I know the Yale program on climate change, or the Yale Center for Climate Change Communication, found that 80% of registered US voters support providing tax incentive and rebates for purchasing appliance that can be powered without burning fossil fuels. However, there's also been some polling that's shown, I think from Morning Consult, that heat pumps only appealed to something like 11% of respondents in the United States. And I know a lot of the people that I've talked to through this role attribute this disconnect to sort of just basic lack of information. Can you share sort of why you believe there's this disconnect for support for climate action and actually deploying low carbon solutions like heat pumps, and how Electricasa fills that gap?
Yeah, there's a good reason people haven't previously thought there was a choice. The grid has been relatively dirty up until recently, and it's only been climate actions that have been taken to clean up the grid that now present a real alternative to fossil fuels. As the grid gets cleaner, it suddenly creates this opportunity where you can reduce carbon emissions by electrifying equipment in houses, and that didn't exist before. So it really is a whole new way of thinking about our energy system. And at the same time, the performance of heat pumps has gotten much better. There's a perception out there that heat pumps don't work in cold climates, and the technology has gotten way better. And I spent a year in Vermont, and heat pumps work great in that environment. So the technologies, there wasn't really a choice to be had before. Now there's a real choice that has important implications. And so we just need to find a way to make that choice more apparent for people. And I believe a majority of people believe in climate change. They think it's important. They want to take the right actions. They just need a little guidance on figuring out the right next steps.
Great, thanks, North. I have a couple more questions for you now, and then I want to pivot to the Q&A. We're getting some great questions there. Please keep them coming. I will pivot to those momentarily. Before we do so, I am particularly curious to learn about sort of partnerships. You mentioned a possible partnership with a city for rolling out this tool. I also just personally went through the search for a new apartment in New Haven for grad school, where energy costs are really high, and home energy scores would have been really useful throughout that process. So can you tell us how you might be partnering with real estate agents or landlords or whatever? It'd be great to learn about some of your plans there.
Yeah, cities have been real leaders when it comes to energy transition, and I think about the work that the city of Berkeley has done, city of Portland. They really have innovative policies, and they've sort of blazed a way forward for the rest of the country. And I think that there are other cities. The city of New Haven has a very strong climate action plan. And there's a real recognition, cities want to be leaders in this area. They recognize that they can't reach their carbon reduction goals without addressing the built environment, and the residential sector is a big component of that. And so they're natural partners to want to support work in this area. And so we'd love to work with any city. The bigger city, the better, really, when it comes to just using innovative tools to really bring folks along. Realtors are an interesting group. They're a little, realtors as a group, not individually, but as a group, they tend to be more transaction and sales oriented. And historically, energy information was not wasn't something that they wanted to necessarily include in a listing, often because, houses need work in that, they need improvement in that area. But that's not to say that all realtors are that way. I mean, there's definitely green realtors who recognize that sustainability matters to their clients. And so if you can provide realtors with a quick way of being able to analyze properties and to be able to communicate the sustainability features to the marketplace, I've found realtors to be very receptive and open. And so, I think that we created Electricasa with realtors in mind because they're so important to understanding, how people think about houses and how the real estate industry works.
Great, thank you. And I see that someone else asked that question in the Q&A too about realtors. So that's glad we just killed two birds. I was very curious too. Great. Well, we're also getting a bunch of questions about cost, which is something I'm curious about. And I know in my own work for the Renewable Thermal Alliance, find that many homeowners really are not interested in replacing a system until it's broken. And you talked about sort of meeting consumers where they're at. It'd be great if you could sort of talk about sort of the high barrier to getting a heat pump, which may be a couple $100 more than just replacing the system with a gas-fired system. And then if you could sort of speak to sort of the education component with rebates and incentives as well. Great.
Yeah, I have to be a little careful with that because it's so, it really depends on geography and where you are in the country and the specific utility rates and rebates that are available to you. It's so region dependent. And the rebate and incentive landscape is changing very fast. I mean, when I first arrived in Berkeley, there were no incentives for heat pumps, which I found shocking, and that's starting to change. So I think that cost is still a big factor, and rebates continue to be really important. But you have a lot of decision making happening right now that doesn't even get to that stage, because the replacement cycle is happening only when equipment burns out. And then it's often an emergency when that happens. And so there's no consideration of alternatives. And so I think that, as you, if you can provide homeowners with tools where they can actually make plans and have some sense of, heat pumps as an alternative, then all of a sudden, you start to create this demand on the industry, and you start to scale up the amount of equipment that's bought and deployed, and that, as it scales, then all of a sudden it starts to bring down the cost for everyone else. So we're still in the early stages. I mean, the number of electrification projects is just way too low, so it needs to be higher.
Absolutely, and good point on the regional component. I know there was a question about sort of specifically in the Northeast, is the attic insulation component enough of an envelope improvement to ensure that a heat pump wouldn't increase utility bills 2 to 4 times?
That's true. You have to take a whole home approach, and air sealing is super important. I mean, to ruin the performance of a heat pump only takes a small draft. And I've been in a lot of homes where, people are wearing sweaters and you find that there's like a hole in a window, and there's a very low level of understanding of home energy performance, and people don't understand that drafts, all your heat can go out the window if you have an open window. So you really have to seal the entire enclosure. Well, that's something that has to happen. And so I agree. If you have a home with an obvious draft, attic insulation is not going to fix it. You really have to seal it up.
Sure. Are you going to add some educational components on that to the app, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's already, we already talked about it in the weatherization
Sure.
and the importance of air tightness, and the diagnostic that professionals use is air tightness. And I typically, you can start to have that conversation when someone's interested in it.
Mhm.
And no good contractor is going to do attic insulation unless they seal that space up and also look around and make sure that they're taking care of all the obvious things that could go wrong.
Great. Well, there's a related question from Mike here that sort of builds well on my previous question. It says, what is your perspective of the required role of a homeowner taking the self-aware action or initiative, and barriers to inaction? And in particular, he asked sort of, what do you believe distinguishes Electricasa in making adoption easy to a homeowner directly as compared to local weatherization contractors or recognized utility programs? And I know we had a good conversation there about sort of the role of contractors and how you're looking to partner with them and be additive. Love it if you could explain that.
Yeah, I think for early adopters and innovators who are early to learn about heat pumps, they're going to go right to contractors, and that's the right step for them to do. But you have this whole other group, like kind of this early majority, late majority, where it's not going to be on their radar. And an application, it's hard, to call a contractor is kind of a strange process for a millennial. I mean, you have to call them and make an appointment, and they come over and they look around for a while, and it's all very personal. Using mobile technology and having an app or having a web application, it seems so more intuitive, and it's available anytime you want to access that information. You can do it yourself, and it's free. And so it's kind of a generational change in terms of what people are comfortable doing in terms of taking action.
Sure. And it sounds like you may even connect up with contractors at some point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't. I mean, we have no intention of becoming a contractor. I mean, it's absolutely the role of contractors is absolutely essential, and so they're great partners.
Great. So one more question on a short question on sort of the location-based theme, since we were just touching on that. Are all the ratings location-based, based on, for example, ASHRAE climate zones, and equal to or better than local code? That's one of the questions we got. So,
Well, I mean, we haven't deployed yet. Today's just a demo of basic functionality for the app. But depending on where we deploy, then we'll be consistent with the ASHRAE guidance. So I kind of built it with the guidance for the Bay Area in mind, because that was the area I was most familiar with. But certainly, depending on where the app is deployed as a pilot, the recommendations will be specific to that climate zone.
great. And there's one question that's risen to the top, and reminder to everyone that you can upvote questions with their little thumbs up if you want to get one at the top of the list here. Stanley asks if you can share your viewpoints on multifamily housing, apartments, and commercial buildings. You're talking about partnering with cities who are major leaders, and a lot of those, the residential footprint is not private sort of homeowners. So can you speak to that and sort of the scope of this tool?
I don't have very deep experience with multifamily buildings. In general, those buildings tend to be more complicated. They're larger. You have different apartments with lots of different systems involved. And Electricasa is really intended to be a simple tool. And there's 74 million single family homes out there. There's just a wide open opportunity for focusing on those. Maybe when we electrify half of those, we'll have some time to focus on multifamily. But I think that there are existing methodologies out there that apply to multifamily that are pretty strong. The important part is the grades. Like, I mean, Isabel and I have talked about it before, if you want to, even if you want to rent an apartment in Europe, it comes with an energy grade. So you have some sense of, whether it's up to code or not. And what your energy bills are going to be once you move in. The problem is there's this split incentive where the owners of multifamily buildings don't care about the energy costs because they're not the ones paying the bills. And so if you have someone who's renting a building, they have no way of knowing what their energy bills are going to be. And the owner has no incentive to improve it. So energy grades are really important to correct that.
Totally agree. I'm really excited about that as someone who recently lived in a place with windows that weren't sealed up in New Haven. Great. So there are a bunch of questions that may be pretty quick for you to answer. So I think I'll just run through them and then maybe get into some of the sort of deeper questions as well. So one that I'm, wonder if you will be interested to hear is, what is Electricasa's revenue stream? Is it free to homeowners, or what are your plans there?
Yeah, it's free. So one function I didn't do a demo of, but that we're working on and we're planning to add, is that when you add the 5 photos and you upload the information that you think is correct, you get back the grades immediately. But if those grades were to be used in like a real estate listing, you would want a guarantee. You want those grades to be verified, and you would want someone to basically review the photos and make sure that the information is correct before those grades were used in the context where other people could see them, and it might matter. And so we imagine that there will be sort of a free plan for homeowners, and then kind of maybe a charge plan for people who are verifying a lot of homes, like realtors, for example. And so there'd be kind of 2 tiers of service, the free tier and the premium tier. The other opportunity to generate revenue could come from marketing services of contractors. Obviously, if we can attract homeowners to provide their information and we know what services they need, that's a natural kind of lead in to contractors who want those homeowners. And so we'd have to kind of experiment what that would look like and how it would work. But obviously, we'd be providing value to both homeowners and contractors in that equation.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Let's see. There's another question here on whether Electricasa takes into consideration the efficiency of heat pumps, including geothermal, to assist the homeowner with purchase decisions, or if that's something you would take a view on later if you're very agnostic about what technologies people adopt.
Yeah, totally. It depends on where you are. So in the Northeast, geothermal heat pumps are a more viable option than if you're in California. In California, it's really air source heat pumps make the most sense. And of course, there are 2 kinds of air source heat pumps. You can have a mini split or a ducted system. Oftentimes if people have a room furnace, then they're a good candidate for a mini split system. And if they have a ducted furnace, they're probably, it probably makes more sense to replace that with a ducted heat pump. But at the moment, we're just trying to get a single heat pump listed, but over time it would certainly get more sophisticated in terms of offering the options and making clear the efficiency trade-offs and the price trade-offs for those options.
Great. And do you share detail on sort of anticipated payback period for heat pumps, sort of the increased cost and like how quickly that would save money, or you're not able to because you don't have the utility bill data and everything?
It would be great. It would be great to have the data to be able to provide that information to homeowners. But you need to have accurate data, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's utility bills are always changing, and with weatherization, there's a lot of moving parts to that. So So currently, no, but it'd be great to be able to provide that analysis if we knew it was correct and accurate and helpful.
Great. Well, here's a question from Stanley that I'm really curious to hear the answer to as well. So you spoke about the role that cities can play already, and Stanley asked what role you think states and the federal government or even regulatory bodies like FERC can play with electrification.
It would be great if they became champions of electrification. Certainly. For when I first got to California, I thought it would be a no-brainer to go to Sacramento and to lobby for home energy scores on a statewide basis. And and I was very quickly corrected in terms of the depth of the research that they have to do and the amount of time and analysis that it takes to really get proposals through the state legislature. It's a pretty intense process, and so cities are great laboratories. It's much easier to get something passed at a city level and to allow that to become a model for other cities. You can experiment more quickly. You can really see what works. And I think states can can sort of decide, can look at what's going on in the cities and decide, what can we adopt at a state level that makes sense. But I think you have to crawl before you can walk. And so that's why I think it makes sense to start with cities.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Great. Lots of other questions here. I'm almost overwhelmed. Thank you, everybody. This is awesome. There are a couple questions on privacy. And of course, you, by necessity, collect very detailed addresses and other information, and sort of how are you considering data privacy and all that?
Yeah, we obviously we don't want to sell information to other parties without their consent, and so we don't want to engage in any of those practices. But I do think there's an opportunity for people who want to opt into notifications, and so we want to make sure that we build the technology in a way where it's very transparent where the information is going and what we're doing with it, and we're giving people control over the data that they submit, and it's only being used in ways that they approve of. I can't stand it when when the whole lead generation business, because I've done a lot of research on solar companies, and every time I look into a solar company, it's like I get a phone call from someone else who wants to put solar on my roof, and it just drives me nuts. Like you have to really be transparent about how you're using people's data.
Sure. Yeah, I went through that same process recently, trying to help my family figure out solar. Great. So let's see. There's a question here, which I know we also talked about a little bit. And this isn't quite directly in the scope, but I think it's a really interesting question. Jameson comments that he or she has found that a lot of contractors are not on board with heat pumps, specifically in the DC area, because natural gas is cheap and the preferred heating fuel. And I know, as I've done some research in the Northeast, one of the big barriers is just technical training and finding qualified contractors. And so they ask what your experience has been finding qualified HVAC companies or contractors.
It can be a challenge. I mean, even the best contractors are still like 50-50. The most like kind of sustainably minded contractors are still doing 50% heat pumps, 50% gas. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think that we often expect contractors to do a lot. We place a lot of expectation on them to be able to educate folks, and that's often not the role that they necessarily want to play or have time to play. I really believe that homeowners need to be more educated on this and to demand demand electrification, and if there is the demand for heat pumps, contractors will be responsive. They just want to have happy customers, and so anytime you're changing a system and you're going from gas to electric, there's always some uncertainty about whether that system is going to perform as well as the one you had. And they're real. That's not like a made-up concern. It's a real concern. I mean, when you're lighting fossil fuels on fire in a box, you produce it's a really high temperature, hot air, and it feels hot. And if you replace that with a heat pump, the temperature of the air that's produced by a heat pump doesn't have the same intensity to it. And so for someone who makes that replacement, it can often feel like, oh, this system doesn't work as well. And that, that's a real concern. The last thing contractors want to have to do is to get called back by an unhappy customer who says, "Hey, why'd you sell me that heat pump? It doesn't do what I expected it to do." So there's real resistance out there.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. And I know that there's a big movement to sort of do more training from various utilities across the country. I'm aware of a couple programs in the Northeast. So hopefully as customers continue to get excited about the technology and get informed about it, the demand will increase. Great. Well, we're running out of time, so I want to be mindful of that. I guess just one question here is someone, is concerned about the replacement costs being prohibitively high, and wondering if you can sort of speak about where the market for heat pumps or water heaters is going. What are the hurdles to sort of reducing prices there? Do you expect costs to go down? Or is it just something you sort of need to educate folks on, sort of the payback period and everything?
It really depends. There's some really exciting work being done on a 120 volt heat pump water heater. Right now, the heat pump water heaters that are on the market are all 220, and so oftentimes that can overload the electrical panel. And so you're not just replacing the water heater, then you have to change out the electrical panel, which really increases the cost. And so the manufacturers can make a model for the American market. There just hasn't been demand for it. And so one of the big initiatives is to get a system that works with your existing electrical panel, because that can really reduce the cost. And you talk to manufacturers of heat pumps, they'll often say, it's kind of a sad conversation, because they'll say, look, we don't think Americans care about efficiency. They don't care about electrification. We've been trying to sell you heat pumps for years. You won't take our heat pump. You won't take our heat pumps. The demand needs to scale, and the way that the demand scales is by initially it's probably be expensive. You just need really strong incentives to make it happen. And but once you kind of tip the balance, and the proportion of new replacements is more than 50-50 in favor of heat pumps, then the whole market transforms at that point.
Great. Well, that sounds like a really good final word of wisdom to end on. Are there any other things that you would like to share out with the group before we wrap up, North?
No, we're really excited to have deployed the application. So don't be a stranger about reaching out with feedback, and I'd always be happy to do a one-on-one demo. If there's someone who think you might be interested in this, please reach out.
Great. And I will leave my email address in the chat. So if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out through me. And as I noted at the top of the hour, we will have a recording of this session available up on the CBEY, the Yale Center for the Business and Environment website by the end of this week, I believe. So you can keep an eye out for that. And yeah, keep in touch, everybody. Thank you so much. We got 22 really incredible questions, and I enjoyed receiving them all. Hopefully we covered as many as possible, but if not, feel free to reach out again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.